your mega gallery says, hey, come on back. Like, that's probably a relief, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this 1966 painting Man Ape is a slightly lower price point, but it is a record holder now. I'm Kate Brown, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. We are back with our monthly roundup on the heels of our first live edition that was held at Independent 20th Century in New York last month. As usual, we're taking a look at some of the big art world headlines. Today, we are going to talk about a remarkable story out of Argentina, where a couple has been charged with concealing Nazi-looted art. Then we'll get into art star Jeff Koons, who's again on the move with a gallery representation. And finally, a work of fantasy art that sold for $13.5 million. I'm joined by my co-host, Ben Davis. Hey, Ben, how's it going?
I'm great. I'm sad you're back in Germany, Kate, but happy to be talking to you again.
Me too. And we are both very pleased to have our art market mind, Eileen Kinsella, with us. Welcome back to the podcast, Eileen.
Great to be here.
You've been really busy the last few months with our executive producer, Sonia, working on a podcast series for ArtNet. Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, we're really excited to introduce this. It's called Art World Infamy. We're going to look at the case of Inigo Philbrick, which I reported on extensively. The first episode drops next Thursday, and then it's followed by 3 more that will be released each following Tuesday. So definitely tune in. We're excited about it.
Very cool.
Fantastic. Philbrick, for those who've been under a rock, is a convicted fraudster and former art dealer who was convicted of wire fraud. You covered that very well over the years. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
But you were also just in Chicago. What's going on over there?
So it's called Chicago Exhibition Weekend, and it was the 3rd annual edition of the event. I mean, it's really a great, lively look at the art scene. It's spearheaded by Abby Pucker. She also founded Gertie, which is a salon that puts on exhibitions. It was basically like a citywide, event with galleries participating, institutions participating. Sort of serves a dual purpose of everybody coming together without the costs of an art fair. And a lot of supplementary events and talks, dinners. A lot of energy in Chicago right now is really fun to see.
So it's like a Chicago gallery weekend, kind of, but better promoted, better organized?
Yeah, also with the participation of institutions, and quite a few, everything from like the Art Institute of Chicago to some of the smaller institutions throughout the city. A new show on the Chicago Architectural Biennial opened at the Cultural Center. A lot of kind of like crossover promotion with galleries and institutions.
Cool. You see anything cool? See anything good?
There's a great show at the space called Over My Head, and it looked at like the importance and the significance of conceptual art in Chicago. Over My Head is kind of a joke to like Chicago being a quote unquote flyover city, maybe sometimes not getting the recognition it deserved, but
conceptual art joke out of the Midwest.
Yeah. I mean, it was an interesting mix of names, everything from Dara Birnbaum to Rashid Johnson, Martin Puryear, Rosemary Trockle. It's a great space. It's former architecture photography space that has been taken over and is really wonderful.
Nice. Cool. What about you, Ben? What have you been doing since I left?
Oh, well, actually, I've been traveling a little bit too, although much closer than Chicago. I went down to Philadelphia over the weekend for the opening of Calder Gardens. Have you heard about this project? Yeah, so basically the Alexander Calder Foundation has been working on, I guess, a museum in Philadelphia, which is where Alexander Calder is from, and his dad and his granddad, who are both artists as well. It's right on Museum Mile. It's actually not called a museum. They're calling it Calder Gardens, which is an interesting choice because, you can't really see what it's all going to be right now because the gardens have yet to grow. It's this beautiful space you can enter, and then there is a building full of Calders with all these interesting, foldy little galleries. It's a Herzog and de Meuron building. They're famous museum builders. And this weekend was the debut. Philadelphia had a parade for it. It was really nice.
Wow. Nice. Cool. A Calder-themed parade?
It was, I guess, a Philadelphia artistic innovation theme parade. It's actually Sun Ra's orchestra performed.
Oh wow, that's cool.
There were tumblers. It was great. It was great. It was really very, very festive.
Yeah, I've been seeing some pictures on Instagram, and it looks like a very Herzog installation of the art.
Yeah. It's what I would say about the building is it's really nooky. There are a lot of nooks in it. I'll be interested to hear what the architecture press has to say about it, because it's really designed as a series of moments, where you come down the stairs and you find like an interesting little cave with a cauldron installed in it. And then you go down and there's like big galleries with big cauldron pieces, and then littler galleries with little cauldrons nestled in them, and 2D cauldrons, a little nook of like family work. It feels like it's a little trick box full of surprises. I think
sounds
it's going to be an interesting place to cool your feet when you're in Philadelphia. What about you, Kate?
Yeah, back in Berlin, I came back and ran right into Berlin Art Week, which is 300 events,
Enormous
100
event,
plus exhibition openings. So I have no comprehensive summary of that. I was moderating a couple panels on this museum symposium that was really interesting, and Catherine Wood from Tate and some other museum directors were in town, so that was really great. I did get to see some art, but not as much as normal. But I did see the Mark Leckey retrospective at Julia Stoshek Foundation. Mark Leckey being a British artist, best known for his video works on like pop culture and subcultures. Mm-hmm. And there was a lineup down the block. It was insane, but it was also very good art inside and a good overview of his practice. So.
Did you discover anything new about him? Or was there one that stood out for you?
I mean, his famous work is called Fiorici Made Me Hardcore from 1999. And that's nice to see in big screen because it's available on YouTube, but it's not to the same effect. But I guess my learning was that I don't love his new object-oriented art as much as his video works. But it was just interesting to see the full breadth of his practice altogether. Anyhow, let's get into it. We will rove right over to Argentina to start. Our colleague Brian Boucher was covering this story. Recently, in the beginning of September, an Argentine court charged Patricia Cadgen, the daughter of a Nazi financial officer, and her husband with concealing stolen art. They say their holdings included 22 works or more. But the case began when a Dutch journalist spotted an 18th century painting by Giuseppe Gislandi in a real estate ad for their house, which I guess they had put up for sale. It's very strange. And actually, he was there anyway. He went knocking on their door because it was the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And Cadgen was a known figure to have absconded with works of art. And they didn't answer the door. But because he was there, he noticed that the house was for sale and ended up just by chance noticing this real estate listing. It's quite a wild tale.
Well, obviously the hook or the big thing about the story is the fact that it was discovered when this painting was glimpsed in this real estate listing. That is just such a funny thing. I mean, it's a serious story because the question of Nazi loot is very serious, but the photo itself is very funny. Don't you think the photo is funny? It is this sort of, I don't know what to call it, stately painting. And it is depicted above this hideous green couch, like it is in this room, and it is way too big for the wall it is on. Like if you were sitting in this couch, you could easily put your head back into this through this woman's body, and just the fact that they found it that way is very, very funny, I think.
Yeah,
certainly. Yeah, what do you make of it, Eileen?
I mean, it made my head spin because I've covered a lot of Nazi loot and restitution stories, and people go to such great lengths to conceal an image of an artwork or the existence of it, or sometimes they try to hide things on the paper trail. And it was just probably one of the most blatant and obvious cases of you shouldn't have this. It was ill-gotten gain. I've seen many cases where there's a little bit of a gray area where it's was it taken under duress? Was it sold under duress? Was it stolen? But in this case, the family members are direct descendants of an officer that worked with Hermann Göring, a notorious art thief and brutal Nazi officer. And so just left little to the imagination about how they got it and why it was on their wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to add to the weirdness of it all, then they hid the painting. So when the investigators finally got access to the house, they had swapped it out for a tapestry, according to media reports.
Large rug with horses and some nature scenes, which I love.
So, we'll see what transpires in the court proceedings, but it seems like, why would they hide it? But then they have said now that they claim they didn't know its provenance and they have filed in court to keep the painting. But this is a high-profile case because the Jewish art dealer who the painting was looted from, Jacques Goudsticker, there's been lots of restitution cases surrounding his collection. Aileen, you probably read about this too over the years.
Right. He was a Dutch dealer and he tried to flee during the war and the rough times and apparently was trying to flee but fell on a ship and died. I've heard his name numerous times. But one thing that I thought maybe would be worth mentioning is that in many of these cases, there is no direct path to the restitution. Like it made me think of the whole story about Woman in Gold, that famous Gustav Klimt painting that became the subject of a movie. The woman who owned it actually did will those paintings to the Belvedere, but then 1938 and Kristallnacht, everything else happened. So many other things happened in between that her heirs had to go back and prove no, eventually these paintings were stolen under duress. But it wasn't until archives in Austria were opened in the early 2000s that the way was paid for it to go back, which is all to say that even though, as I said, it's a blatant case of this was stolen, the path to restitution, there's going to be legal hurdles. You mentioned the couple already went to court to say this is ours and we're not returning it and it's disappeared from the wall. So there's probably going to be a process before anything gets returned or goes back.
So the AFP reported they have been charged now. They hid the painting when the police showed up after this Dutch paper first reported on this. They've had a long and running investigation into Nazi loot and were looking into the specific painting, kind of suspected this family had it. And so we're watching their real estate listings. They went on to go back through their Facebook photos and find another missing painting. It's not exactly clear if it's Nazi loot, but they posted just another still life that is known to be missing on Facebook that people are looking into now. And according to the AFP, when they did the raid, the police opened an investigation and conducted multiple raids in search of the painting, only to find 22 works from the 1940s by Matisse and others whose origins have yet to be determined. So I just think that's very funny that they chose to have this painting, which is rather dour, instead of a beautiful Matisse above their couch. I mean, come on. Yeah. And you're trying to sell the house. I mean, which looks better?
Could you shortly describe the painting? Because it is not the most beautiful work of art.
It is a painting of the Contessa Caglione from 1710. It has a dark background and, a fairly, distinguished looking woman in quarter profile looking out at you. It is just doesn't do a lot for me, to be honest. But that's actually, in a way, an interesting thing. The Jewish Museum some years ago did a show of art restituted from the Gudesticker collection, and they're not all hits. This is the thing about the restitution is that, it's just the art that was stolen from an art dealer, which could include very good works and lesser works. I have no idea where this kind of homely painting, to me, sits in that. The Argentine Press says it's worth $50,000, which all told is not that much for an old master.
There was another article from a different paper that now is saying that it might be worth $300,000, and an expert is now saying that they might be by a different artist. It just seems that we're going to be hearing a lot more from this story. This is going to be an ongoing legal drama. I'm sure the experts are all about to descend into and examine this painting. But we should move on to talk about something a little bit lighter. Jeff Koons' light feet in the gallery world. He's always moving around between galleries every few years. He just left Pace a little while ago, and now he's back at Gagosian. Eileen, what's been going on with Koons?
Yeah, I mean, he's moved around a lot over the past, I guess, decade, and he's back at Gagosian. He had a 4-year stint with Pace Gallery, another mega that took him on exclusively in 2021. Not the height of the pandemic, but the immediate aftermath of it. And I think the goal was always to kind of corral his market because he's been notorious for really expensive production costs. And some of the galleries that he's been with in the past actually, sold works to people before fabrication even began, and then, ran into problems with things not being delivered on time. Some very wealthy collectors got angry and sued both him and his gallery. Yeah. So the idea with Pace was to corral this, right? Get it all under control, not sell things that hadn't been fabricated yet. I've heard some rumblings that costs ran up again, and now he's back at Gagosian, which in a way it's kind of unusual because Gagosian was one of the galleries that was dealing with the lawsuits that came from these things not being delivered on time. And I don't know what happened with Pace. I mean, I'm assuming that things didn't work out if he's gone after 4 years. But at the same time, I also have seen that sometimes when artists are like so big and so kind of successful that they can kind of write their own ticket, like back in 2013, he was showing at both Gagosian and David Zwirner,
That's right.
those gazing ball sculptures that were very
dreadful,
famous.
Absolutely dreadful work.
And, the thing that makes me laugh a little bit is kind of like, say what you want, like whether you like him or you don't like him. I'm not a huge fan, but there's always an incredible buzz around anything that he does. And I was thinking back to this past May at Frieze when Gagosian showed these incredible Hulk sculptures and they're all playing different instruments. I heard that one sold for 3 million, but the booth was just packed. It was like, I don't know, maybe it's this like, comic fantasy. It like stirs up something like nostalgic in people for the Hulk in particular, but the booth was just packed.
I mean, we talked about that. We did a previous
On the
podcast
Roundup.
about that. We talk about this guy too much. Do you think we talk about him too much? Is he a big deal to people? I mean, he's really in the late stage of his career. He's been working on this series of, I think, porcelain inspired by old-timey porcelain figurine sculptures. I think Pace, maybe after they got representation of him, maybe showed one of those at an art fair, kept promising that there would be a show of them. And to my knowledge, that hasn't happened. He's a famous artist, but he seems to have performance issues.
Well, Eileen, you covered, I remember back in, I think it was 2021, you wrote about his market and it was trending downwards at that time. And so I guess like just to tack on to Ben's question, in this new scenario of the art market, which, we've also been talking about on the podcast, is Koons now again a safe bet after sort of falling out of favor market-wise?
I mean, one of the things that I looked at when I was reporting that he was going back to Gagosian after 4 years at Pace was his overall sales. And they've dipped really sharply over the past couple of years. I should be clear that that's at auction. And I guess, you could say, oh, maybe not a lot has come up. But when you look at like the fact that he's the most expensive living artist at auction, and that's for that stainless steel rabbit, which sold for over $90 million in 2019, is it like, oh, because that's the Holy Grail and that was at the height of his career and that was the height of his production. That's like the bauble that every contemporary art trophy hunter wants. Yeah, that's still a fact that he's the most expensive living artist, but maybe some of that luster has disappeared as he's continued to, as Ben says, not produce or not fulfill some of these obligations. Is it like that was the height of his career and that's still a fact, but maybe things have dropped since? Not maybe, they have.
Well, I was more interested in this story because I wanted to talk to you about artists changing galleries, Eileen, because I think this is an interesting thing. Most artists, of course, just have no gallery. And then there are these some star artists who galleries are bargaining for. And to a certain extent, Koons is a unique figure because really he can only work with a mega gallery, because only a mega gallery could possibly fund the things that he's doing, which involve this tremendous amount of fabrication know-how and expense. And he's a huge perfectionist. He's bankrupted himself before, he's a chancy person to work with. But on the other hand, there is this dynamic of galleries competing for artists. And there's been some talk about that being a destructive spiral. So I wondered what you thought about those news stories.
Yeah, I mean, also he's known for having a huge studio practice. I'm sure at some point we've reported on how many people he employs, and I know that they do a lot of the fabricating and the work. So that's another cost to consider. I mean, what I'm curious about is, like I said, Gagosian has endured lawsuits from him. Like, what's their game plan going forward? Like, nobody has really told me about that. Like, when I talked to Pace back in 2021, they're like, we want to get his market under control, right? And you're completely accurate that only another mega gallery could afford to support these kind of outrageous fabrication costs. What is the Gagosian deal going forward? Like, are they going to also stick to saying, like, we're not going to sell your work until it's actually fabricated? What do they hope to get out of it? And it's probably a good deal for him, right? He's being backed by his old former gallery that has given him a lot of love, that sold his work at Frieze and, created this huge buzz.
I mean, back when he left Gagosian for Pace, and people were reporting on that a few years ago, and they got a comment from Gagosian. It was a one-line text message. Gagosian said, "It seems like a good fit," which was terse, and it very much sounded like, "Good luck to you," is what it sounded like. So they've got him back, and maybe they've got a new plan. Who knows?
Yeah. He hasn't had any shows announced with Gagosian yet, has he?
No.
Okay.
It is a little bit of a mystery why he went back there.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what they have planned for him and, when the big debut, I guess it's not really a debut, but when the homecoming or the big return comes.
I was just going to say one thing, which is that for Koons, it's probably a great deal, right? Like he's back at his mega. My question is what Gagosian gets out of it and what the deal is like going forward. But if you're a mega artist with these production costs and your mega gallery says, "Hey, come on back," like that's probably a relief, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this 1966 painting Man Ape is a slightly lower price point, but it is a record holder now. So Ben, please tour us through this story.
Sure. Well, I don't know. Jeff Koons is a artist who, what's the tagline? He questions high and low taste. So in a way, it's a perfect transition into the last story that we wanted to talk about, which is about the sale of this Frank Frazetta painting called Man Ape from 1966. It sold for $13.5 million at Heritage Auction House in Dallas, Texas. It is a painting that people associate with Conan the Barbarian. It was made to become the cover of a collection of Conan the Barbarian stories from the 1960s that became a big blockbuster and kind of defined the look that we think of when we think of Conan the Barbarian, and indeed of swords and sorcery as a genre in general. So an important painting in its category. Frazetta is probably one of the most famous fantasy artists. It's a very specific genre of pop art. He has had numerous sales in the last few years in the millions of dollars. So he is definitely, at this point, closing in on being like a blue chip artist. And for those who haven't seen it, although I encourage you to look it up, the painting is set in a dungeon. You have this scary barbarian character, shirtless barbarian, wielding a dagger who's leaping into the air and throwing his legs like a wrestler around the neck of this screaming ape creature with a flowing, dramatic red cape. So they're locked in combat, and it's dramatic. It's, I don't know, some would say kitsch. Some would say it's pretty rockin'. I just want to know what you guys think of the painting.
I think that there's something happening with fantasy art in general, perhaps because of maybe AI, where there's this uptick in this sort of fantasy-like slop, and there's a sort of new sentimentalism to images that you see online, these like AI-generated images. So I wondered if that's given a new currency to a work like this that is like ultimately, very handmade and bespoke. It's actually, it's kitschy, but it's not kitsch by definition. So I think that there's something about that. And in terms of the painting itself, I think if I knew the story, maybe it would mean something to me, but it doesn't do much for me. I like it more than Egyptian Queen, which is this other painting that sold for $5.4 million in 2019. And I mean, it's so tacky. It's this like woman leaning against a pillar. She's topless. It's almost got this Orientalism problematic aesthetic to it. So
it's an exercise, I would say, in fantasy Orientalism. There's this bodacious queen with this dramatic loincloth and a swarthy servant nearby, kind of queasy overtones. What do you think of it, Eileen? Are you a Frazetta fan?
I mean, it's not really my taste, but, I'd say there's some skill there. Like, I actually almost see the painting as like kind of divided in two, because the figure on the left is really such like a Marvel type of comic character. And then when I pan over to the ape, I almost see like a little bit of Goya in like this howling skull, like I think of some of Goya's like horrific characters.
That's
that are
generous.
I know, and a lot of pain and like a lot of tortured expression, and it's almost like the picture is like split in half for me. It's definitely not my taste, but one thing I have learned over the years is like never underestimate the enthusiasm and the niche for like the passion of like these individual categories, be it like for cause or like some of the comic art. It's, these specialized
sure.
niches. One thing that happens, like this $13 million price tag is stunning to me. It's huge in its own right. It's also double the previous $6 million price that was achieved just 2 years ago. So to me, it sounds like there's a rising appreciation for this artist, whether it's within the niche or not. There's this notion that trophy hunters always want like the best of each thing, the best dinosaur or the best old master. I could picture that it might have appeal for somebody who wanted the best of this genre.
I could see that.
That's interesting. Just to underline that, because that's a market reporter's perspective on this that I don't necessarily have intuitively. That for you, it's not just the big price, but it's the difference between the last price and this price that suggests, a dramatic come up of interest, like a moment for this artist.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Because I was going to say, I don't think it's AI as such, Kate, because, this surge in interest around his art started a little bit earlier, but I do think one of the things that's happened with AI is it's just sort of broken a lot of barriers of taste, because, like you said, you're exposed to a lot more of this stuff and you can just see people out there prompting it and generating it. Basically what I'm saying, you can just see the sheer kinetic power of the public love of fantasy art of all kinds. He also did science fiction art. There is some of his sci-fi illustrations that have also gone for very big prices. He did do comic book works. There's a really weird work of his that was called Queen Kong, where it's sort of a bodacious
I've seen that.
babe on the top of the Empire State Building like King Kong. She is not an ape. She is very clearly a human woman. He is really known for getting this kind of bikini-clad maiden, ripped warrior kind of imagery into the swords and sorcery canon.
For sure. And I think it's culturally durable. Like if these are stories that meant something to you, similar to Dune or Star Wars or the Marvel universe, as you mentioned widely, like it would be a really interesting piece to have. And he's part of the upcoming Lucas Museum of Narrative Arts. So there's going to be some institutional clout coming, but we were talking just before about Koons and as maybe a safe harbor, which I don't know that he is because his margins are really crazy, but in terms of expense, as we talked about. But to me, I also can't help but think of the story in terms of red chip art and the fascination with fossils and space rocks, which on one level is aesthetic, and it's nice to see people's interests broaden, but also these are maybe other sorts of safe havens when, young buzzy artists are maybe not the best bet right now. Is there something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that familiar with Frazetta's market in particular, but I'm sure if I talk to a specialist, like somebody at Heritage, they'd probably tick off the kind of things of like the year it was created, the subject matter, the style, all these things that would influence the demand for it, like the rarity, maybe the provenance, maybe it was like owned by somebody important. But I also think that all these other elements come into play. Like when I was just rereading the story, it's like Conan, that eventually became like Marvel Comics, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger was in the movie. So again, it's like, I was saying how like the Incredible Hulk Koons sculptures maybe ticked off some nostalgia. I'm sure that there are many different aspects of this particular work that would appeal to somebody who loves sci-fi and fantasy art, but also maybe somebody who loves the Conan movie, or somebody like George Lucas, who is creating this museum of narrative art and has been scooping up some things at auction. Multifaceted for sure.
George Lucas, also famously a collector of Norman Rockwell. There is a great appeal for this sort of illustration art. And, I wouldn't actually myself dismiss it as kitsch on its surface. I mean, I think there are some tropes and cliches that it relies on, but I think it has a kind of dynamism and interest. There are queasy things about this kind of art, but I think it's kind of interesting to kind of unpack it. I do have to mention, Robert E. Howard, the author of the Conan the Barbarian books, there's a lot of weird race stuff in those books. He is obsessed with race in a very 1930s kind of way. And Conan the Barbarian is this blue-eyed barbarian who's Howard's own Celtic heritage. And there's just a lot of strange anti-Semitic, anti-Black racism floating around in those books. This character, Thak, is like a servant character in this story who is kind of maybe coded as African. So there is something a little bit weird about this image. If you think about it through those prisms, then again, Frazetta claimed never to have read the books and just worked from impression. So do with that what you will.
He didn't read the books?
Yeah, I
Wow.
was reading before this. He boasted. I didn't read any of it. I drew them my way. I bet a lot of people bought them for the covers and didn't read them either.
Wow.
Wow.
That is bold. I love that.
A lot of bravado.
Yeah, seriously. Well, this has been great. Thanks for joining us, Eileen. And I'm really looking forward to the inaugural series of Art World Infamy. I can't wait to tune in.
Yeah, you've been working on it for so long. I'm excited for you to get it out there.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It will help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Menalili with contributions from myself, Ben Davis, Carolyn Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.